Sounds like an Arabian racehorse to me. Hello, my name is Will, and this is Exploding Helicopter, the podcast that does a great James Stewart impression. Most of us at one time have imagined ourselves making a film. Maybe it was an idle daydream, a late night conversation with friends, or a moment as the credits rolled where you thought, you know what, I could do this. For most of us, that idea stays where it began, as a dream. But every now and then, someone comes along who doesn't treat filmmaking as a fantasy or even a distant ambition. Someone who simply decides to make movies, whether or not they have the backing, the budget, or even the first idea of what they're doing. And that brings us to the film we're reviewing on this show, because the man behind this movie didn't wait for permission. Cliff Twemlow, bodybuilder, bouncer, music composer and novelist, took the dreams the rest of us keep in our heads and turned them into actual films. And we're looking at one of the key films in his idiosyncratic oeuvre, Target Eve Island. To help me review the film, I'm joined by another dreamer, for whom success is just one misbegotten idea for a podcast away. It's Doug Tilley from Cinema Smorgasbord. Welcome back to the show, Doug.
Thanks for having me. I will refrain from doing my Jimmy Stewart impression as we kick off things here.
That's, you'll save that for another day, indeed. But I'm glad
I'm going to be saving it for another podcast that I'm going to be doing.
Well, I'm glad to have you on this show because I know you have a particular interest in the type of filmmaking that we're looking at here. Because prior to the excellent Cinema Smorgasbord, you used to do the No Budget Nightmares podcast where you shone a light on micro and low budget films and attempted to celebrate this level of filmmaking. So before we tackle Target Eve Island, I wanted to sort of gauge your interest or what lies behind your interest in this level of movie making. Why should people bother with micro, no budget films when, they're objectively inferior to so many other movies?
It might sound self-defeating, Will, but I actually think that a lot of people probably wouldn't be that interested in shot on video cinema because the immediate reaction when your eyes look at these low quality images, and this, these movies we're going to be talking about today, or the movie specifically we're going to be talking about today, is from the early 80s. The kind of ugly quality of shot on video cinema, which is for me one of the appeals, like that really came to it really became kind of a wider scale in that it was in everyone's hands in the mid-90s. That's where there was an explosion of these kind of movies. And that was really a lot of the focus of No Budget Nightmares. But personally, my interest in it came from the DIY quality of it. And that's what I'd like to call it, is DIY cinema. Amateur cinema to a certain extent. Some more amateur than others. Because there's a real, let's put on a show attitude behind it. Nobody's making any money from it. That everyone is just there because they had some extra time. You see that in the documentary we're going to be talking about today, right? None of these people really got paid. If they got paid, it was minimal amounts. But when they were arriving at these locations with the knowledge that, hey, we're going to be spending the next however many weeks making a movie, it is kind of this dream thing. And even if the results are not necessarily perfect or sometimes even watchable in the cases of a lot of the movies that we covered on No Budget Nightmares, it becomes part of this legacy, this living document. It's why the box set that we're also going to be talking about today is so important, right? It becomes a testament to the people who made this, who put their time towards it, because making a movie, even now, making a movie is this huge amount of effort from a whole collection of people. It's this real collaborative thing. But when you have no resources whatsoever, literally no budget that's on the books, it's just whatever people can bring to the production, people of various talent levels, various experience levels, usually very low. That's an incredible thing for me, that you ever get a final product from it. When you have these filmmakers in the 80s and 90s, and I'm talking mostly about genre filmmakers, like horror filmmakers like J.R. Bookwalter or Todd Sheets. These guys, they made movies again and again and again, and they managed to forge a career in something that really shouldn't even be watchable for most people. It's not even something that you can, even though a lot of these movies have had, even in recent years, restorations, there's no way that you can get a quality looking image from the perspective of what people who are fans of cinema generally, like you and myself, would see as quality. But there's still an energy and a passion. And also the very fact that so much went into these movies, I'm just glad that if they're not being necessarily celebrated, that they're being recognized. That is one of the things that we're going to talk about today. The movie that we're going to talk about I don't think either of us probably are going to be like, this is a great movie. But it is an accomplishment. And everything, when you see something happen in it, when you see an exploding helicopter in it, sort of, you see it, you're like, it's incredible that this was ever even put on video. It was incredible that these people came together to do this thing, that he got, there was someone in this person's general circle who had a sports car or a fake gun or could do makeup, or the fact that people got together. It's the most classic, I want to entertain. Maybe there's pie in the sky ideas of the fame that might come from it, but really it's just about, we want to go out, we want to put on a show, we want to entertain. And to me, that's something that kind of has endless interest. Though I think just like with this movie that we're going to be talking about, the making of the movie stories are often a lot more interesting than the final product.
Yes, I definitely agree with you there. And yeah, I know, I think you have mentioned something which I definitely agree with, which can be very important at no budget or micro budget level of filmmaking. But I think it's important, frankly, whatever quality of production you are making, is if a film is made with love. And if you can kind of, there are some films which are, I watch, which they have many faults or many imperfections, but you can kind of feel the passion of either the actors or the director or the writer. You can feel that it's a film that is made with love, and that can compensate for any number of quality issues, perhaps with the sets or the acting or the script or whatever. And I think in some of these very, very low budget movies, you get that sense of like, here are a group of people coming together to do something just for the sheer hell of like being in a shared creative endeavor together. And that, I think, can save quite a lot of otherwise very bad movies.
I mean, there's also a purity of vision aspect to it, right? Which is that there's not some group of people, someone in an office who are saying, you can't do this should not be in the movie, for better or for worse, right? I mean, some of those producer type roles would probably stop you from making bad decisions, but sometimes, in fact, often in these shot on video movies, those bad decisions end up in the movie, because what else can you do, right? If you're going to stage something that takes a significant amount of effort, you don't get a second shot at it. Maybe the nation in which you are filming your movie gets invaded when you're making the movie, and you have to incorporate that into it. All these difficulties and trying to overcome these difficulties. Now, that's a reality of any film set, but it's a whole different kind of reality when you literally have no resources on top of what's just in front of you.
Okay, I think it's time to get stuck into Target Eve Island. So let's see if someone can complete this sentence. Target Eve Island
explodes onto your screen. A race against time to uncover the secret of ERAD, codenamed for Intercept, Return, and Destroy. The beautiful Caribbean provides the background for excitement. German scientist Anna Lindenberg is kidnapped by master criminal Harry Filipino to gain access to the ultimate weapon of destruction. William Grant of British intelligence and his aide Chaser have 48 hours to discover the secret of
IRAD, Mr. Grant.
Eve Island is the location for action, suspense, romance. William Grant uses every method to secure information concerning ERAD.
Champagne?
This is to you. Masha
Meanwhile, Chaser prefers to do things his own way. Agents the world over converge on Eve Island to uncover the secret of ERAD. Explosive entertainment.
Well, before we start talking about Target Eve Island specifically, I thought it'd be useful to start with laying out a little bit of context here. So, Cliff Twemlow was born and raised in Manchester. He was into bodybuilding, and that led him into working as a nightclub bouncer. Now, Twemlow wasn't just a muscle-bound brawler. He was also a talented musician who ended up having a successful career as a composer of library music, and perhaps most notably wrote the theme for the long-running TV series Crown Court, which is back on TV screens in the UK here. He then turned his hand to being a novelist and wrote a couple of books, including Tuxedo Warrior, which drew on his time working as a nightclub bouncer. Now, after this book was turned into a film, where Twemlow had a small part in, that is where he decides to start making his own films. He was working completely outside the system, working with non-professional actors and with non-professional crew. He was financing the film out of his own pocket or whatever money he could put together from friends and contacts. And over the decade between 1983 and 1992, he made, I think it's 8 films, or at least 8 that were completed. Across his films, Twemlow worked with a lot of the same people. So in Target Eve Island, there's a lot of the same actors that would go on to work with him again and again in all of his films. So those include like Brett Sinclair, Jeanette Grey, and Maxton Beasley Sr., who is the father of Max Beasley Jr., who's been in umpteen British TV shows and was Mariah Carey's co-star in the notorious flop Glitter. Most of those people were not, as I say, professional actors. They were just people known to Twemlow who he persuaded to get in front of the camera. So of all of the aforementioned people in this film, probably the most notable is a guy called John St. Ryan, who started out with Twemlow and did manage to use these films as a launch pad for a professional career in TV and B-movies. Now, a few years ago, Severin Films re-released all of Cliff Twemlow's films in a box set, along with a documentary about his life and career called MANCUNIAN Man, which Doug and I have both watched in preparation for this show and to help with our discussion of the film. So before we review sort of Target Eve Island, I thought it'd be good to talk a little bit about Twemlow in general and what we learned about him from MANCUNIAN Man. So Doug, I guess, what aspects of Twemlow's, I guess, life and personality stood out most for you from MANCUNIAN Man?
I mean, the library music aspect was fascinating to me because really it becomes key to all of these films even being made, or that he was, because of his apparently composing of over 2,000 pieces of music, that he would be regularly getting a cash influx, right? He would be getting money from the rights of these songs, which would allow him then to put that money into these movies, or at least attempt to, all throughout the 1980s and into the early 90s. Now, apparently it kind of went through ebbs and flows, and in the 90s it started to get a little bit more difficult. But that's just such a fascinating thing, this kind of muscle-bound guy who, you know, he had chased so many things. Like you said, being a novelist, he was a boxer when he was a kid, apparently quite a notable one, at least locally. But the music, the way that it's described in the documentary, it seems a little, it's not necessarily complimentary. I'm not even entirely sure whether Cliff Twemlow played an instrument or not. You don't really get a sense about, like, they call it like doody-doo music or something like that. I guess he would just like hum the things. It's like the opening credits for Dark Place, where he talks about the themes hummed by Garth Marenghi. But he found great success with it, like legitimate, real success. I was most interested and curious about, they mentioned the song that's played while kind of the rednecks in the early stages of Dawn of the Dead are killing zombies in the field, and they have that kind of song about being a man. And I've watched Dawn of the Dead 1,000 times. And that music is very familiar to me. He composed that song that's in that movie because it's library music. We know a lot of the music that wasn't used that George Romero did not use from the Goblin sessions, that he just used library music for a lot of Dawn of the Dead. And that's one of the songs. Also didn't realize that the band that was performing that song were actually just the members of the Pretty Things, a band that I have a lot of affection for, the early kind of concept album pioneers in the 60s. he had his thumb in all of these different things. A really fascinating guy who basically would gain great success, then lose it all, have to do things out of desperation, and then kind of rebuild himself again and again. The bodybuilding stuff was interesting. The bouncer stuff, I think, is particularly interesting because it's such a specific kind of look at this kind of mid to late 70s disco era in Manchester. But the fact that he, that I guess while he was recovering from being beaten quite badly, that he would even think that he should write a book about his experiences. He is someone, I think, that was very good about myth making about himself. It's hard to know exactly, some of these stories, how legitimate they really are. But it's also very funny to hear people talk about at one point that like he had this massive ego. There's never been a mirror that he didn't stare into. And then later it's just like he's the most humble guy that you could ever imagine. It's just like, this guy is a real enigma all throughout it. And it's sad that he died. We haven't mentioned this yet. He died in the early 90s. So there isn't a lot of like interview footage you can incorporate into this documentary. But he seems like just an incredibly fascinating and very motivated person, and someone who had the sort of charisma. The idea that someone would go through some of the experiences that are documented in this documentary and then come back again and again and again. I mean, he just must have been a really interesting guy to be around.
Yeah, I think you put it really well about the many facets that he has to his life, and it is hard to sort of reconcile sort of all of the different aspects to his life, as you say. And I think that's another interesting aspect in his story, is just how much sort of success and failure he encounters along the way, because there's a story in the documentary where it actually seems like he's perhaps on the verge of actually having some real breaking out beyond the realms of library music, where he pens a song that seems to be getting some traction on national radio. Unfortunately, it just happens to be called Live and Let Die, and is coming out in exactly the same year as the James Bond film with the Paul McCartney track, and subsequently ends up in court and having the song having to be pulled. And he experiences failures, which, as you say, which he just keeps returning from again and again. And it is a shame that there isn't a little bit more documentary evidence with himself to try and get some insights into what lies behind that kind of resilience. I mean, I don't know. I was thinking about that whilst I was watching it, and maybe it's something to do with the bodybuilding, in the sense of like he almost treated his career in the same way as he treated sort of building up his body. It's just like if I put the work in, if I work hard enough, like I will get bigger, or I can come back from this latest disaster that I'm facing.
I always think, we have kind of this fascination with this warrior poet type character, right? That's all throughout literature, and also, even in our action movies to a certain extent. But he really did live it to a certain extent. There is a moment late in the documentary, and it's a sad one, right? His life has really taken a downward turn, and someone that he was very close to shares that he had been writing this poem about his life. Now, the quote that he says from the poem, it seems a little, it's a little ridiculous to a certain extent, but it's also obviously very heartfelt. This is a guy who really poured himself into his art, right? He obviously took it to some extent seriously, and then to other extents, not so much. But he accomplished it, right? He got these things made, not necessarily finished, but made. But it's also, he was someone who, some of the people, one of the consistent really things that you see in this documentary is that he was just always interested in the next thing. And he would pour himself into those things so completely, like you said, just like with the bodybuilding, that it would kind of dominate his entire life. And that is the kind of personality type that gets things done and gets things created. But it also must be devastating when these things don't work out like you want them to.
Yeah, what do you think? That was something I wanted a little bit more from in the documentary, is because as we've sort of been discussing, he made a fair number of films, but actually many of them never really saw the light of day until this recent box set. And it remains a bit mysterious as to quite why these films never sort of emerged from the time. I mean, there's, somebody says, well, he wasn't that great with the business side of things, but GBH, he got GBH made, he got GBH distributed. It was a success. So you would think there wasn't a barrier in terms of like knowing how to get these films distributed out to, I mean, we're talking about the video store market. So yeah, I was kind of fascinated by the mystery as to why some of these films never went anywhere. I don't know if you had any flashes.
I have some suspicions in regards to it. Especially the case when it comes to, he would later shoot a movie on film, right? So that one you think would open up all sorts of doors in terms of distribution. But these movies just didn't get, like, if they got completed, maybe they had small releases in some countries, but in some cases just they didn't get completed at all. I suspect, and I did see this a bit when it came to kind of my interviews with shot on video filmmakers, once something is complete and it's out there in the world, then it can be judged. You know what I mean? Then it can be reviewed. People can talk about it in positive, and in the case of these kind of movies, probably a lot of negative ways. And that's a real tough ego trip. And it's hard also to finish, in quotation marks, a movie and realize that you don't have all the pieces that you need, which is one of the things that happens with the movie that we're going to be talking about today, right? It's obviously something that they got back. They realized they were missing lots of footage. They had to reshoot footage. Some of the stuff that they reshot, they had forgotten important elements of that we'll talk about in just a little bit. And then you have something that is not as good or as polished as you really wanted it to be. And you're going to be hesitant. You're probably thinking in the back of your mind, well, maybe if I do something else, we can return to this and we can really we can polish some of it. We can reshoot some elements of it and make it even better, make it what it should be. But the fact is, you're never going to be able to do that. And as time passes further and further, the people that were involved with it are less likely to come back. They're going to look different. You're just not going to be able to piece those things together. And so, you can either choose to release it or you can live this dream that you're going to release a better version later. I suspect something like that was probably happening here, particularly because even though there's lots of movies that he was involved in, we're only talking about like a 10-year span, right? You could see how it's someone in his case, especially someone who liked to kind of bend time to his will a little bit. We learned early in the documentary that he would tell people that he was 5 years older than he actually was, so people would say that he looked good for his age. And then I guess late in the movie we find out that he enters a senior bodybuilding contest even though he wasn't old enough to actually go into the contest in the first place. I mean, this is a person I think who wanted the work to be good, or at least wanted the work to be as good as he thought it would be an acceptable level or good enough to go out into the world. And maybe he just didn't feel that they really were that. And frankly, from what I know about these movies, and of course the one that we watched, there's something to be said to that. They probably could have used a little bit more work. But when I watch something like Eve Island, I don't know what could have been done necessarily outside of maybe a few scenes to make the whole plot make a little bit more sense.
Well, let's move on to Target Eve Island. Now,
Must we?
I'm afraid we must. But this film came out in 1983, and it was Twemlow's second film, his first being GBH. That had been a hit on VHS, and that film had been set in the world of Manchester's nightclubs. So Twemlow now wanted to do something a bit more ambitious. That ambition did meet a number of difficult realities. Money ran out on the production, with the crew having to blag locations to film, and the cast reduced to eating coconuts when there was no money for meals. And they also had to contend with the American invasion of the island where they were filming. As for the plot of the film itself, we have William Grant as a James Bond-style British intelligence agent who is tasked with finding a kidnapped scientist. Grant pursues various leads around 1980s Manchester before learning that the missing doctor has been abducted by a gangster, the wonderfully named Harry Filipino, who has whisked her away to his secret hideout in the Caribbean. The action now shifts to the islands of Barbados and Grenada, where Grant, now aided by his old sidekick called Chaser, which is played by Cliff Twemlow, and they attempt to unravel the mystery and rescue the scientists. So So, with all of that out of the way, Doug, what did you make of Target Eve Island?
I mean, it's incomprehensible, right? The plot of it is impossible
It really is.
to follow. It has been pieced together with voiceover that every time it re-enters the movie, you're like, oh, they just didn't have what they needed here. I will say that Brett Sinclair as William Grant, as the lead, as a kind of a suave James Bondish type spy, he's not a great actor, but he's very comfortable on screen, right? I mean, I can see why and he was obviously a very attractive man. I can see why they wanted him front and center for something like this. He looks like he could be the lead of a movie. I guess he was doing some modeling at the time and DJing. So, I mean, I think he's perfectly fine in it. Some of the supporting performances are of mixed quality, but that's just going to be the reality of it. I think overall, the performances in this movie are better than you would expect, considering that these are almost exclusively people with no acting experience whatsoever. And that includes Cliff himself, who has a presence because he is such a kind of a hulking figure. But his character in this movie makes no sense at all. It's a friend of William Grant. He shows up like sporadically. You wonder, like, for half the film, it's like, where is he? Like, isn't he part of this movie? What happened to him? And then he just pops up again. We learned in the documentary that they didn't have like shot lists, right? They were just basically shooting pieces as they felt like it, or as they had locations available. And this is exactly what happens because there are essential pieces of this movie that are just not here whatsoever. And we'll talk about it, but there's obviously bits that also were filmed much later. We've already talked briefly about the fact that there was the invasion of Granada at the time. It sounds like they were having some difficulties in Granada when they were there before the invasion even happened. It makes you wonder why they went there in the first place. They could have stuck with the Barbados and just filmed whatever they wanted. They had to match footage back in England or in Manchester specifically, to some of the stuff that they had to do there. But that's just making movies, man. And you can tell how much I enjoyed the movie by how much I'm talking about the making of it rather than what actually happens in it. All that said, there's impressive stuff in here. I don't think David Kent Watson was a hapless, horrible director. There's that sequence where they're being chased by the men with machetes through the big field. I thought a lot of that was like really well staged, very, it's damning by faint praise, but what I was going to say, it was, you can understand what's happening in the sequence, which isn't always the case in the movie. Some of the action scenes are pretty good. I think John St. Ryan, like, there's a part where he has a fight scene with the man with the sticks, like the martial arts expert that Twemlow knew. And for a brief moment, it's actually really impressive. John St. Ryan throwing those kicks, I thought was pretty great. I mean, he's not necessarily terrific as an actor, but he has a real physicality that these guys are throwing themselves into these roles. It's also sometimes incomprehensible because the audio quality of the dialogue is very bad.
Yeah.
A lot of it has been post-dubbed. A lot of it has not. I don't know if that was a limitation in regards to its release as well, but sometimes you'll have William Grant, the Brett Sinclair's character, will be talking to someone and his dialogue is clear, but because they didn't have the other person mic'd because they were probably thinking that they do like a two-shot, you can barely hear what the other person is saying whatsoever. Real limitation, like real shot on video limitation type stuff. That said, it is a movie. When you watch it straight to finish, I mean, it's almost 90 minutes. It has action basically every 20 minutes or so. You understand that it's trying to be a Bond-like movie as you're watching it. The fact that it's incomprehensible is is not helpful, but by the time you get to the end of it, you're like, oh, I guess he was doing this and this was happening, and you realize that there was some people that he needed to get revenge against, and he got it. And this is all, again, to say that this is a quality movie would be a lie to anybody. And it's also a movie that benefits so greatly from knowing the context in which it was made that it's really impossible to kind of talk about it without that context. Because as a movie, it's not very good, but it is a fascinating document. And it's a fascinating, when you see like the holes in it, and you know that, say, that one character forgot that they were supposed to do an accent for some of the stuff, that makes it amusing. It's not necessarily amusing in like a Tommy Wiseau movie type way, but it's amusing in, oh my gosh, these guys all went to Barbados and to Granada, and they made a movie, and they somehow, came out with it with something that is almost feels like a movie, despite all of the limitations from the video to the performances on down.
Yes, and I would echo that point there. Although, and again, conscious that it sounds like you're sort of damning with faint praise, which is actually probably well-deserved faint praise. Which is, it is completely incomprehensible, but it kind of looks and feels like enough movies that you've seen before that it feels
Exactly.
like, well, you know, that was a movie that I watched, and given the fact that hardly anybody involved in the making of this film had any background in making a film, it's a miracle really that this thing exists and looks
Absolutely.
and makes as much sense / no sense as this thing does. And I would agree with you, there are little flashes of moments within the film where you think, actually, there's something here. I mean, there was during one of the action scenes, there's this shot, and you don't know, was this a moment of great skill by the director, or was this just complete fluke? Where it's a fight scene between John St. Ryan and the Styx guy, where this car kind of pulls up really quickly. The door opens and John St. Ryan like jumps out, and the camera's like right down on the ground. The car stops and the door opens over the top of the camera, which is on ground level, and John St. Ryan gets out. And it's a really dynamic shot. It's like it looked really cool, and there are these little flashes of moments within the film where you see something that's, I don't know, comes across very well, but you are, as I say, left wondering, okay, was that just a fluke, or was that a moment of skill?
And maybe they obviously didn't have time and money, right? So if something comes out of it and you're impressed by it, then that, to one extent or another, that is a skill that they were able to put it together. I just think that there was at least somebody, and it probably, and again, the movie, the documentary, I should say, takes kind of a negative view of David Kent Watson generally. They have some old audio that they incorporate into the documentary from him, but he must have had, again, an eye for composition to a certain extent. Maybe he didn't have an eye for making sure all the pieces were there, but I do think that there's enough here that is, from scene to scene, is comprehensible, suggests that there was a person with actual talent there. I mean, like, the final big kind of fight scene, which involves Brett Sinclair's William Grant and Colonel Petrovich, they're fighting in the cave, which is a really interesting location, and then they fight out of the cave, and they get on the dirt bikes, and they're racing around. Like, a lot of that stuff, it's very badly and choppily edited, and also the audio is really bad for all, just basically just music playing, but it's still the very fact that they're doing all of these interesting different things. They knew that they needed to kind of end things with a big action sequence, and they did what they could to make that happen under, very difficult circumstances, as we learn. It's not great, but again, it's all an accomplishment. Every single thing that you see here is an accomplishment, and that extends to trying to incorporate the military invasion and footage of that. I mean, it's really silly in the context of the movie. You just see the William Grant character on the phone is just like, oh, this will be great cover for us trying to escape. And then they put some really low quality news footage into it. But still, I mean, that is part of the putting on a show ethos, right? Which is, if something is happening and we can get some sort of a production value or attention from it, then why not? Let's do it. And I kind of enjoy that as a story, even if in the context of watching it as a narrative, it doesn't always work in this context.
Well, let's talk about the film's tone, which, I mean, it's a light-hearted sort of riff on James Bond or kind of spy movies in general. So it is not taking itself seriously in any way from that point of view. But what did you make of the tone here? Was it earnest, camp, or did it land somewhere in between?
I think by the end you're supposed to take his grievances seriously, but certainly for the first half, it's explicitly campy. You even get the sequence where he meets up with someone who gives him a gadget that he can use. Not the most high-tech gadget, but something like that. So you get your cue sequence, you get your kind of opening sequence where he's being given the mission. We get an outline of what is going on, though I'll be honest, I had to explain the plot and the machinations of what is going on here in some detail, I'm sure I would get a lot of it wrong, especially because you find out at the end that it was all not necessarily what it was meant to be anyway. I think the more that they hold on to the tropes of James Bond style spy movies, the easier it is to understand what's going on and to understand the character. And it's nicely punctuated by memorable scenes, particularly that junkyard scene early in the movie, which I think is actually pretty well done as well. They're really throwing themselves into that location. I think the car crusher stuff is, I mean, they really had an idea and they went for it in regards to it. But then you'll have like 10, 15 minutes where it's just Brett Sinclair running into women, sleeping with them. Sometimes they appear again. Suddenly there's a red-haired woman that I don't think had been introduced up to that point. Becomes very important. She's tied up. I don't know if we ever see her again. There's a blonde woman that is very important to the plot. Again, you were very right in what you said earlier, which is this movie benefits from the audience's familiarity with these kind of movies already. So the fact that it doesn't make sense, he's going to another location. I guess this is important. This guy's clearly the bad guy because he's acting bad. So, that he needs to battle that guy. Tonally, it is all over the place. There's a sequence, a really strange sequence about 3/4 of the way through the movie where William Grant and the
female bathtub scene?
No, the bathtub scene is odd in and of itself. I'm thinking of the scene where him and Stella Starlight go on a picnic. I think they're still in Barbados at this point, and they kind of adopt a young child along the way. They just bring this kid along with them, and it's just hanging out with this kid. And then they bring the kid back to I guess the downtown area later, and the kid immediately gets shot and killed. And you're like, what? That is supposed to be this devastating, hard moment. But all I was thinking is they just stole a kid and spent the whole day with him. There's just lots of little odd moments like that make it difficult to kind of gauge the tone. Whatever tone that you get out of it, it certainly wasn't ever always intentional, right? So it's hard to know what they wanted and compare that to what they got out of things. But in terms of who this William Grant character is, he's supposed to be a suave, wisecracking secret agent, very much in the James Bond mold, and then it uncomfortably knocks up against actual serious topics.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the actors here. And now, ironically, for a Cliff Twemlow film, he doesn't actually appear in this film that much.
No.
Hard to know, is that an aspect of modesty on his part? He kind of knows his limitations, or is some other factor at work? I mean, I don't know. But, you're new. I mean, I can't say I'm particularly experienced either, but I have seen a few other Cliff Twemlow films. I mean, you're new to Twemlow. So if you're going to continue watching these films, you're going to be meeting a lot of these actors again and again.
Right.
In these movies, because is pretty much a repertory cast of actors that he has, that he employs frequently. So who are you looking forward to seeing again, and is there anyone you hope doesn't crop up?
Twemlow himself is someone I'm more interested in seeing more of, because you don't really get a sense of what he can bring to the table in this movie outside of that one sequence in Harry Filipino's office where that's such a strange scene, because they're constantly being threatened by these people who are bursting into the room, and they start beating on William Grant, the main character, the spy guy, and Chaser's in the room, but he's like, I'll let him take care of it. But also sometimes it seems like he's not in the room at all. It seems like he's just kind of separated from the action that you're actually viewing. As I mentioned, kind of when I first started talking about this movie, that Cliff Twemlow character Chaser, I don't know what they're even doing in the movie, outside of him wanting to be in it in some capacity. Why didn't he make himself the villain, right? Why didn't he do something that would put him on screen a little bit more? Maybe it's because he wanted to focus on the kind of creative elements on it. Maybe he had to spend more time, getting locations or getting extras or something like that. But I don't get... From the documentary, I got, all the mystery and intrigue of who this person was and this fascinating life. You don't get, the performer here like you do in a lot of his other movies. So I am very curious about that. As I already mentioned, I think Brett Sinclair does a pretty good job in the lead. He's obviously the one of all of these guys who should be in that position. And John St. Ryan is certainly physically very capable, even though I don't think anyone in this movie is pulling off that Russian accent very well. I guess the only performer that I'm I'm not really sure about this and I don't really want to see it again is maybe the guy playing Harry Filipino. I mean, that's it's a very ugly character anyway, and and he is, you know, a baddie. But this movie has a lot of bad guys in it. They have a lot of villains that go all the way through it, and this guy is chewing scenery a little too much even for this movie. But I mean, at least he's throwing himself into it. At least he's given a go. The thing about these performers, which is kind of surprising compared to a lot of the shot-on-video movies that I'm really familiar with from the 90s, is that you don't really see a lot of people who look like they're scared to be in front of the camera. These guys, whether it was fueled by alcohol or confidence, maybe it's just Twemlow himself. He gave these people the feeling that they could do this. And that's pretty incredible. Also, he got a shocking number of people to undress, considering that they didn't have any money to make this thing.
Well, what's the next Twemlow film you want to explore? Assuming you even want to continue your exploration of his filmography.
I do, but it definitely would be material that's a little bit more connected to my interests. So it would either be the horror sci-fi work that he has worked on. Specifically, what was the final, well, I mean, maybe the most distributed final movie, that science fiction movie that he made.
Firestar. I think it had a subtitle, but yeah, it was the Fire.
Yeah, some of these also have multiple names. I think that one holds some interest to me, just because it just seems so wild that they would even try to do such a thing. But to me, the one that I'm immediately going to go to is GBH, because it feels like it was the success that prompted, you know, who knows how big of a financial success, but it was the success that prompted basically the entire rest of his career. But it's way more personal of a piece of work, right? I mean, it basically is a dramatized version of the life that he was living at that point, or at least how he saw himself. And to me, this guy, this person, is a lot more interesting when he is revealing things about himself, whether intentionally or not.
Okay. Right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be looking at the exploding helicopter action.
Drugs are America's #1 problem. Now, snake eaters back. Armed, dangerous, and deadly. Together with a streetwise hustler from the ghetto, they're going after the traffickers. Lorenzo Lamas in Snake Eater 2, The Drug Buster.
We're back, and now we're looking at the exploding helicopter action. This occurs early in the film when our hero, Grant, finds himself pursued by a helicopter. Armed with a shotgun, he gives the bothersome copter both barrels as it swoops past at close range. The helicopter disappears behind a nearby ridge. We hear a crash, and we see a plume of flame emerge from behind the ridge. Hero 1, helicopter 0. Doug, what did you make of the exploding helicopter action?
I mean, the very fact that you have a helicopter at all in a movie of this, I mean, they have a lot of you know, they were able to get a hold of a lot of different unique locations. And, you know, we find out in some of these other movies like sports cars, and there's actually some fancy cars in this as well. So I guess I shouldn't be that surprised, but compared to the kind of movies I'm used to in the 90s, on shot-on-video type productions, you would not see a helicopter in one of those unless there was one passing by in the sky and you just wanted to incorporate it. I mean, this one, they obviously were doing something. You wouldn't necessarily call it a stunt, right? I mean, it's just, you see a helicopter flying fairly low. You get of course, the close-up of someone shooting from it, which obviously is shot at a different location. And then you see it go behind a ridge. You see a not quite imperceptible edit. And then you see what I have to say was a very impressive plume of fire shoot into the sky. Indeed. And I mean, this is, you could see Hollywood productions which do exactly the same trick, which is, you know, you hide the helicopter and then you put the big flames going up. It's a classic movie making thing. It is not as fun as seeing a model helicopter smash into the side of a mountain and go kabloom. But in terms of what they had to do, which is they could not blow up a helicopter, but they needed to blow up a helicopter, I was fairly impressed by it. There's two kind of big explosions. I was actually reading, I think, a review of this movie where they say there's just something about seeing a big fireball in a shot-on-video movie. It just makes everything feel a little more real than you do when you see it on film. And I think it's just that you can kind of feel the effort that's been put into it. Again, I wish we had a little more behind the scenes. Can you imagine? I bet everyone wanted to be on the set the day they blew up something, flew it into the air. I'm sure for someone like you who's seen hundreds of helicopter explosions, you do have to kind of put it. You have to understand the context of what they're doing here. The very fact that we're talking about this movie having a helicopter explosion is just kind of incredible in and of itself.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think you need to grade on the curve here, and as you say, it's incredible that they have a helicopter chase sequence in a film like this. I mean, from watching the documentary, I mean, the level or the lack of professionalism that was going on behind the scenes. So how on earth they staged that? I can't imagine. Obviously, other productions, they'd have radio links between the ground and the helicopter to say, okay, we want the helicopter here and go now or whatever. I can't imagine there was anything like that going on with the staging of this scene. So I mean, and where did they? I imagine they blagged it, but where I see just the presence of the helicopter, weaving it into a action sequence as they do is wildly impressive. I agree with you about the explosion itself. I mean, yes, very common trope to have the helicopter disappear from view before it then, inverted commas, explodes. But there are much fancier, bigger budgeted movies that have employed that trick, that are still employing that trick. The Fireball itself, I liked it. There's really deep, dirty, like dark oranges and black smoke in there. It's and it was a very respectable size. I mean, there's CGI fireballs that I watch now, which are far worse, and they would be far better off just staging a explosion along these lines and using that instead. And if they can do something as decent as this on the money they had for this production, well then surely these other films can do a bit better with the resources that they have available. So all in all, I was very pleased with the exploding helicopter. I mean, I have to say, it's sort of that whole sequence. It kind of emerges out of nowhere.
It certainly does. And it absolutely does.
It's kind of over almost before it starts. So there is a certain sort of climactic quality to it. But hey,
it feels very much like maybe this was even shot later, right? Which is, I know a guy who has a helicopter, or I know a guy who can get a hold of a helicopter, or we can rent a helicopter for a very small amount for like an hour. And this guy, he loves it. He'll fly it. He'll come over, right? All we need to do then is get a shot of a guy hanging out the side with a shotgun, and then all he has to do, we can do it in 3 hours. You have him next to the car, we get a few shots of that, we have him land behind this ridge over here, and then think about all the production value this would add. I mean, you could see a situation where they'd be like, we got to drop everything, we need to shoot this right now. And of course, this is exactly the kind of person who would be like, you call up Brett Sinclair, hey, you got to get your suit on, we need to add this to the movie. But it's also exactly the kind of thing that you could just pluck out of the movie almost entirely, outside of the fact that he then mentions it to his superior, who's just like, I don't believe any of that.
Okay, I think that just about wraps things up for this show. Doug, thank you for joining me once again. Before you depart these shores, would you like to take an opportunity to pimp out your wares?
Yeah, certainly so. If you enjoy anything that I've been saying today, well, maybe you could dive into the No Budget Nightmares archive, since that's a little more attuned to the kind of movie that we're talking about today. That's over at nobudgetpodcast.com. It's a big archive. The show hasn't officially shuttered. We do have plans to at least get together at some point in 2026 to do another episode, but it definitely is not being released regularly. If you want a regularly released podcast, you can find Cinema Smorgasbord every single Monday. That's a podcast that is about a lot of different things. It's an umbrella podcast that covers, of course, the classic Eric Roberts is the Man podcast, but also now extends to works devoted to such diverse topics as the career of Carol Kane, Jackie Chan, Alejandro Jodorowsky, George Kennedy, Oliver Reed, Kiyoshi Kurosawa. The list goes on and on every single Monday over at cinemasmorgasbord.com, or the latest episode over at cinepunks.com. You can find us on social media as well, or you can follow me on Blue Sky at Doug Tilley. That's Tilley.
As always, don't forget to check out the Exploding Helicopter website at explodinghelicopter.com for more reviews and information about helicopter explosions in film. If you can spread the word about what we do by rating, reviewing or reposting, I would be immensely grateful. We'll be back soon. But until then, what should people do, Doug?
Keep watching the skies.
For what?
For exploding helicopters.
This podcast is a proud member of the Lamb Podcasting Network. Find the network at largeassmovieblogs.com.